Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. I am your host for the next hour, Kareem Bowen, and I'm so glad that you guys have tuned in to listen to what we have going on for you on today. I have with me two amazing individuals. I'm not going to bring them in, but I just want to make sure that you guys like, tag, and share this conversation. We have some great individuals that are going to be a part of this. You guys are coming into the social media stream. Welcome, welcome, welcome. But I have with me the Reverend Dr. Sabrina D. Black. She is the lead, the owner, the head of Abundant Life Counseling and Coaching. Not only to that, not to be outdone, she is a speaker, author, global humanitarian. She is your quintessential Renaissance woman about town. And we're going to be talking with her shortly. And also in that conversation, we will have Dr. Brandon Erby, one of my personal mentors. We've been talking about mentorship over the past couple of weeks, John. And so we have one of my mentees who's out there doing big things. He is a PhD individual professor of African-American studies, writing, rhetoric, and digital studies. So we're going to get to them in just one quick second to bring them into our conversation as we talk about the evolution of Blacks and the justice system. Have we evolved? How far have we come or not? But as always, I have with me in the studio my producer, John B. in the place to be. Look at those boyish good looks over there.
There we go.
How you doing, John?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm so excited about today's conversation. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
All right. So you're going to stick me today. I'm going to really try to stick to my time so that we have ample time to really talk to these individuals who I think are the ones that you want to hear today. They are the ones with all of the real knowledge and information. But we're going to talk about the evolution of Blacks and the justice system. And we're going to be looking at a couple cases out there that are, I think, so similar in so many ways, but separated by decades. John, it's going to be interesting. So you know what we do? We always talk about what's hot off the press. And so I want to get right into things. We now know that there's been a raid on number 45 is how I often refer to him, his estate at Mar-a-Lago. John, what were you thinking when you saw this?
They've been trying to pin a crime on this man for 6 or 7 years. They've managed to impeach him, which
twice.
They need grounds to do that.
Yeah.
But they have not been able to name a crime and pin it to him yet.
Well, they've created a case that was impeachable on two different cases. I think that we just lost our bearings and our love for the country in a moment. And that's how I'm going to say it. I think that individuals would not do what the law said and look at cases fairly. So is it over politicized? We will see. We don't know what the issue is right now, so I can't say one way or another.
They're saying mishandling of classified documents, which people have been dismissing very easily.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
So that is the context from which they went in to do this. It's never been done before, but we've never had a president like number 45. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I am going to hold my thoughts and my opinions on that until more information is provided. But it is something that is so noteworthy. I'm getting the indication. I got you, John. John is keeping me on task. Also, Congress finally has signed the burn pit legislation. And for those of you who are out there, when our soldiers were in countries like Iraq, and that was probably one of the key pieces out there in the desert, a lot of things had to be burned. So everything that they were using, a lot of waste, a lot of material, and no one knows what was in these fires and what was going on. There were oil fires that were burning. And so a lot of those soldiers ended up having issues, emphysema and cancers and different things. And so finally, we have decided to take care of our vets. And I applaud those individuals and the individuals that fought for this to take place. This provides financial stability, support for families, emotional, medical, mental health, the whole gamut of support that is necessary. One thing that always angers me about our country is that we have men and women that go and they fight for our country, and then we don't support them. Okay, really quickly, in 1 minute or less, the Saginaw African Cultural Festival. Those of you who are in the Michigan area, if you're in Chicago area as well, out there in WJOL Joliet, Illinois, and you want to come, this is the longest standing African Cultural Festival in the nation. As we understand it, it will take place August the 12th through the 14th. On Friday, yours truly will be hosting, along with the afternoon girlfriend, Yvonne Daniels, who is the brand and content director over at KISS WTLZ. All right. So, yeah, what are you going to say?
And for those of you who are listening to this on Sunday evening when this airs,
Absolutely.
Sorry you missed it.
Sorry you missed it. There you go. All right, so we're gonna get right in. I want to bring our guest into this conversation. John did not think I would be able to do it, but I stuck to my guns and we made it happen. I want to welcome to the stage or the platform here at United Shades of Gray, Dr. Sabrina D. Black, and we're also going to bring in. How are you doing, Doctor?
I am well. Thank you so much, Kareem, for having me today.
I am so glad. She is not a stranger. If you guys have been tracking or paying attention, I know that some of you have been watching from the very first time we talked about doing this show with Art Lewis before our first show. She has been on here, I think, 1 or 2 times and sharing her wisdom and expertise. So we're so glad to have you, Dr. Black. And then we also have with us Dr. Brandon Erby, all the way from the great state of Kentucky at KU. So Brandon, welcome to United Shades of Gray.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I wanted to pull together the two of you because you guys are the academic guys. You're the ones with all of the wisdom and knowledge. I'm just the guy who throws around my opinion and I got a loud mouth, right? But I thought there's some things that over the past couple of weeks, we have seen a reentrance into the media light of 2 cases that I think when I saw them, Brandon, your fans are screaming your name. You probably can't hear them, but they're out. Hey, Brandon! They're screaming your name. So we're thankful for those that are watching. Make sure that you get individuals involved in this conversation, and we might have another opinion. Dr. Clark, Judge Clark. He may or may not be available, and if he does, we're going to be so glad to have him give a call in and to share his opinion. I think that would round this conversation out amazingly. But over the past couple of weeks, we've seen 2 cases come back, and the Emmett Till case and also the case on Breonna Taylor. And as I was watching over the past weekend, I said, wow, this is amazing that these 2 cases are coming up after this Ahmaud Arbery case. And now we see a resurgence of these cases. Brandon, unfortunately, I normally would do ladies first, but Brandon, I want to talk to you because what most people don't know is that you are actually writing a book regarding Emmett Till. So why don't you share a little bit about what you think? Because I know that when I spoke with you, you said, hey, these cases are similar. There's some similarities. What are the similarities between these cases?
Yeah. So, when I was getting my PhD at Penn State, I wrote my dissertation on Mamie Till Mobley, and so that is Emmett Till's mother. And I really wanted to see if there were some connections between what Mamie Till Mobley did for her son in 1955 to what we were seeing with the Black Lives Matter movement. At the time when I was thinking about my dissertation, this was like 2015, 2016. And so Michael Brown was heavy on my mind. Tamir Rice was heavy on my mind. And I was also seeing their mothers, openly talking about their sons, talking about the lack of justice that they felt they were receiving through the murders of their children. And so I wanted to go back in time and see, is there a blueprint for how mothers engage in activism after the tragic deaths of their children? And so kind of going to 2020, when we see Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, I definitely was trying to look at those connections. And one thing that came to mind specifically with George Floyd, and then I'll go to Breonna Taylor, is we only know what happened with George Floyd because of the young woman who filmed that tragedy. She posted it on social media. And if we think about the types of violence that we record with our phones, we can really see how that was something that Mamie Till Mobley did with her son's casket, right? Mm-hmm. And so showing the tragedy of Black death and putting it on full display. Mamie Till Mobley did that with her open casket, and we see people doing that now with their social media platforms. And one of the things that came to mind with
Erby.
Breonna Taylor.
Dr. Erby, I want to stop you really quick because we're taking a number of things. Let's bring all three of us together. I want to stop you really quickly because you being the great scholar and historian that you are, there are some things that I think that maybe you're taking advantage, that you're taking for granted that our listeners may understand about who Emmett Till is. Okay. And Dr. Black, if you could just really quickly, very historic part of Black America. Could you please just give us an overview of who of who Emmett Till is, so that we know from whence Dr. Erby speaking?
As we talk about Emmett Till as well as Breonna Taylor, I know there's a lot of information out there available about in terms of their lives, but I think the important thing to talk about in this moment is that they were individuals whose lives definitely did matter, and their mothers are mothers who grieved. And so even when the doctor began to talk, my first thought was, as a mother, it's hard to think of having to bury your child and to see that. And yes, there is a great comparison between the open casket and social media, because it's a way to broadcast the brutality that our children have dealt with then and still deal with now. And so not only the grief that the mothers have dealt with, but the trauma that the community has dealt with. And I know we're going to be addressing that a little later, but I think it's important to mention that now. When you talk about a 14-year-old young man, the 26-year-old woman, who have not done anything to justify this type of brutality. And yet we still see that on a regular basis. And so I believe that's enough said now, because again, there's so much out there that people can go and read, but just know that it's heartbreaking to hear.
It's interesting that you guys parallel those two in that fashion. See, that's why we need people, John, on here who are thinkers and who think through things, because I would have never taken the look at the comparison of the open casket and what took place on social media as a way of getting it out there. I never would have thought it. So for those of you who are listening, Emmett Till, briefly, 14-year-old boy from Chicago. So those of you listening on WJOL, this young kid was from your backyard. He was down south, and while he was down there in the Jim Crow South, the story is that he whistled. Another episode of the part of the story says that he was just kind of flirtatious with a young white woman who was probably about 8 years older than he was. I think 7 or 8 years older. And this white woman, Carolyn Bryant, went and said that this man, she told her husband, and he got together with his brother-in-law and other folks, and they literally went into Emmett's house while they were sleeping, drug him out of bed. He was in the bed, and Dr. Erby will talk about this with his cousin, because his cousin that was there when he was taken is really the only surviving member, I think, that's alive of the family. And he was lynched. And to Dr. Black's point, he was, when his body was found, he was so brutally beaten. Just disfigured beyond understanding. And you got to go watch the Emmett Till story. That his mother, they suggested a closed casket, but his mother said, no, I need the world to see what hate did to my son. Yep. And so they showed his body, and it was just the most amazing thing. The other incidents we're talking about is Breonna Taylor. Police who were serving a no-knock warrant in your state, Brandon. They came in, shot was fired, return fire from Breonna's boyfriend. Now we are understanding the details. She did absolutely nothing wrong. She was killed in the crossfire. Once again, what I would call a modern day lynching, using a bullet to take the life of another African-American young woman who was in the medical field and was enjoying life and doing great things and had great contributions to make. So both of these cases.
We want to jump in right there. You said a shot was fired, and we don't want to minimize a shot.
There you go. You're right.
10 shots fired.
10 shots fired.
Which hit her. And so again, it's not just shoot once, but shoot to kill. And that was the intent.
And the only individual up until now that has been charged in that case, most people would think, oops, police officers were at fault. This is an open case. They were serving a no-knock warrant. Something went wrong. But the fact of the matter is, the only person that had been charged up until now for this case was charged actually with a crime which amounts to shooting into the adjacent apartment building and creating bodily harm for someone over there, but no one was harmed in that building. Was then released of any charge and absolved from any wrongdoing with Brianna. So we have here a criminal justice system that exists where we see that Black people are not finding justice as we would see fit. And in the case of Emmett Till, a perfect example in both cases where the major white America has taken the justice system into their own hands and created or a dynamic, a verdict, if you would, because they both ended up dead. And so, Brandon, when you hear this, what comes to mind in terms of our evolution? Have we evolved in terms of our relationship with the justice system?
Yes, I want to go back to the term that you said about Emmett Till and Breonna Taylor when you said modern day, but this term of lynching. I think this is something that we have to reckon with when we think about the justice system, because in many ways, those things have not changed. When we talk about people who need some type of criminal justice. And so Emmett Till, you talked about the flirtatious whistle and whatever the case may be, but with the lynching, there always starts with an act that has to justify the death unto the person.
Absolutely.
And so Emmett Till was brutally murdered. He was brutally lynched, but we have to somehow justify that. And that is with, he whistled at a white person, at a white woman, which we know in the Jim Crow era was a, lethal offense. With Breonna Taylor, it's the same type of thing. We know that she was innocent, but there has to be some type of narrative associated with her that would then justify the actions of the police officers. And so if you think about this case, it goes back to she had a former boyfriend who was a drug dealer. And so we have to then try to criminalize her in a way to say, if she had not been in a relationship with a drug dealer, the police would have never been at her apartment in the first place. These are the types of narratives and the types of rhetoric that was put out there to then justify the actions of the police officers. And then there's no case, there's no trial. And then we're saying, justice has been denied. And so we always have to think about the types of narratives that get constructed around these cases, because they try to criminalize people. And once you criminalize them in a way, we don't see justice play out in the legal system.
Because
you're talking about this narrative, that the narrative that continues to be played out about Black America is deviant, dangerous, and dysfunctional.
Correct.
And so when you're looking at us in that way, you're going to always come up with a justification for whatever the behavior might be.
Correct.
And so I'm waiting for the time when we begin to see Black people as developers and determined and distinguished and dynamic versus these deviant perceptions.
And I think having individuals like yourselves as a part of this conversation, talking about these things in a manner that's different than what Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, and I say this all the time, when a person, a protest is a tantrum of the soul. When you can't do anything else, you scream, you cry, you kick, and your whole purpose is to get attention. And I got to say this, Dr. Black, because you deal with emotional and mental healing. We're looking at these conversations 65 years apart, these two incidents.
Right.
So many similarities in the fact that they were innocent until a white man proved them guilty. And then now we're dealing with the fact that there cannot be any justice for the decisions that were made, outside of, them just living. Black folks have dealt with so much trauma.
Yes.
As it relates to trying to find justice or the lack thereof in America. How I think it makes sense that we question or are curious about the justice system in a way that we don't trust it. Can you please speak to that historical compound trauma that often exists in our communities?
Absolutely, because the trauma continues to be compounded. And when we talk about even starting all the way back to slavery, there was a book written about post-traumatic slave syndrome, because we are still dealing with that enduring injury of slavery and hearing the stories from our parents and grandparents of what happened and still living with that trauma. Then there was the proclamation of emancipation that never took place, And so, yes, they proclaimed that we had been emancipated participated, and half the people didn't even get the message until Juneteenth. I mean, and we're still just not celebrating it. And I believe people still haven't gotten the message that we're supposed to be free, because we dealt with segregation, and then we're talking about Jim Crow. And so this ongoing trauma, this ongoing separation, this ongoing idea that we are second-class citizens and deviant for some reason. And so that trauma continues to impact us. And so when you think about seeing something on the news, seeing the violence that we've having to endure, that compounds the issue of trauma in our lives. And there is a great need for healing throughout our nation, just even from childhood issues. I mean, that's why we're looking at this now, trauma-informed states across the country, because we need to understand the impact that trauma has had on the lives of people across the nation. We're talking about this idea of adult, these adverse childhood experiences, which many of us have had, talking about abuse, looking at neglect, talking about trauma, alcoholism. And so there's so many things that we've had to witness and deal with that do need to be addressed. And you know, we can't deal with all of it on this show, but I'm praying and hoping that somebody who was listening would realize, you know what, maybe that's why I'm so angry. Maybe that's why I'm so upset. Maybe that's why every time I watch the news, I'm upset about something and just want to hit something. It's because it's pent up anger and aggression that you've been dealing with over the years that needs to be addressed.
Okay, I want to ask you real quick one more question, Dr. Black. We've heard as of recent, probably the past couple of years, this idea of I don't want to say historical trauma, but when something is passed on, what do we call that? I'm lacking generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Speak to what that is, and do you believe that Black people are really experiencing generational trauma?
Absolutely, I believe that we're experiencing that. And a lot of times when people are talking about generational trauma, they refer to it as generational curses. You know, the idea that there is something in your family that's being passed on from one generation to the next, whether it's generational sins, generational health conditions, generational mental incapacities, generational trauma. And so, yes, that is passed on from one generation to the next, because you grow up with it, even if it's just learned behavior. It may not be in your genetics, but it is something that you have been exposed to, and now something that you've learned to respond to based on what you have witnessed and what's going on all around you. And there is hope for that, and there is healing for that. And so if that's something that you're looking at your family, realizing that we have a history of that in our family, that can be addressed, and you can get healing from that.
Okay. And when we think about that, you know, we look at disparities in healthcare, and folks today would say, you know, Black people need to change the way they eat. They just need to change their diet. They need to be more healthy. But when you look at what we use as staple foods, historically, we didn't get the best of the pig. We didn't get the best of the hog. You know, the ham and the bacon made its way to the master's table. But, you know, what was left, we made, you know, lemon out of lemonade, so to speak, but chitlins out of the remains. You know, hog feet, hog mogs, pig feet, the things that the fattier portions of this thing. But this has been a part. So we see that take place. And over a period of time, it becomes something that we now consider desirable. And then we get to a crisis such as COVID, which attacks the types of health issues that historically have come from the types of food that we eat. And the world is amazed that, you know, why are Blacks being, you know, hit so bad by this? Why do they have high blood pressure? Why do they have, you know, all of these issues? But it's really about the trauma that we experienced during slavery, being played out in the lives that now exist. I want you guys to prepare really quick. We're going to take a quick commercial break in a second, but I want you to think about this next question. When we look at the situation that's now taking place with Emmett Till, Carol Bryant has been brought into consideration in terms of being tried. Each time grand juries have said, you know, we're not going to try her for the case. There was an author that wrote the book White Fragility, and she talked about the conversation of white women's tears. When we come back, I want to ask you the question: why is it that someone who was so intricately involved in the death of a 14-year-old, even though she's older now today, why have grand juries continually decided not to charge her in any of the crime that took place against Emmett Till? We'll take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with more United Shades of Gray.
You're listening to United Shades of Grey on WSGW.
This is Kareem, and we're back with the second half of United Shades of Grey, Conversations of Race in America. I have with me Dr. Sabrina D. Black. I love just putting that initial in there. And Dr. Brandon M. Erby. Before the commercial break, I asked you all a question to ponder, and that question was, we continually see Carol Bryant, who was the woman that was involved with the Emmett Till situation, her name continually coming up. And others have been charged, acquitted. We'll talk about that in a short second. But why has she never been brought? Why haven't charges ever been brought against her? And Dr. Black, I want just your opinion in terms of why we have not seen charges come against her. And recently, this is why he was in the news again. She came up, 88 years old. Grand jury said we're not going to file charges. Why is that?
Well, I would say that justice is continuing to be misserved, and they continue to let her go and deem that it's not necessary for her to come forward or even to ask for forgiveness from the family or to apologize to the family. You know, when I read that and found out that they decided again she didn't need to do anything, it just sounded to me like the original Karen. You know, she makes a claim and gets away and everybody says, oh, you know, but in the meantime, nobody is considering the reality that the family is still dealing with the fact that she's not had to deal with anything whatsoever. You know, when I thought about her and her situation, it made me think about, I don't know if you remember the movie, The Witness. And in the movie, there's a scene where they talk about this process they have for forgiveness when somebody has been wronged, that they take the murderer, the killer on a boat and they tie him up and they take him out in the middle of the water and they drop them in the water. And the family is there to witness this. And if the family chooses to save them, they can swim out and save them. And then the family gets a chance to feel like they have experienced some relief, or the family can let them drown and feel like justice was served. Yeah, and I don't know whether we said which one is right or which one is wrong, but the family gets a chance to make the decision. In this case, the family is not getting a chance to decide anything. The justice who's being misserved is making the decision for them.
And you know, it's really interesting. When I look at this, you talked about her being the original Karen. For those of you listening, Karen is a name that is given. And someone said, hey, that's a racist name. No, Karen is not a person. Karen is an attitude. Karen is that person who is entitled, who thinks that they can do what they want, respond, make accusations, whether true or unfounded, and just really just kind of make the scene about themselves with no real thought about anyone else that's involved or how it may be impacted. But when we look at her, she has never, and the stories would go, and Dr. Erby, I want to ask you this question, because it has been told that she came back and recanted the fact that any of this even took place. And so, you know, and someone said that, you know, the two gentlemen that were found not guilty, her husband, Roy, and his half brother, that were a part of this lynching, they got off by another Jim Crow jury of all white men, and then came back and sold their stories, talking about how they were guilty and how they did it. So why is it that white America gets to live by a different set of laws, Dr. Erby, and especially looking at Emmett Till, how do we reconcile the fact that these cases just go unpunished?
Yeah, it's very heartbreaking. And, you know, earlier in the segment, you mentioned Wheeler Parker, who was there in the house when Emmett Till was kidnapped, and he's the last survivor of that episode living. And when he saw that, you know, grand jury refused to charge Carolyn Bryant this latest time, he issued a statement, which I thought was very interesting, because in that statement, he said that the legal system is a representation of systemic power. And when we're wrestling with systemic powers, which means that when we talk about the legal system, when we talk about education systems, these systems of power, for some reason, Black people are denied equal treatment under these powers, under these systems. And so it's very heartbreaking, because here we are, you know, as you said, over 60 years since the initial episode, since the initial murder of Emmett Till, we have more information. We know more people who are involved. Carolyn Bryant is still alive. And yet we somehow don't know how we can adequately charge her with anything. I think that this Emmett Till case is really a representation of Black America. We think about the tragedy, but it just shows us so much of the Black experience in just this one case. But what I will say too is with Carolyn Bryant, I think that we now need to have a conversation between the differences of justice and accountability, because what we have seen is that justice is not being made in a legal sense. No one was ever held responsible with the murder of Emmett Till. As you said, with Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam, they were acquitted, and we see that nothing is happening with Carolyn Bryant. And so now we have to think about what are other modes of accountability. What are other ways that we can find justice? And I like the previous conversation that we were having about healing, and how healing is a way of justice, right? Educational healing, spiritual healing, all of these modes that we can do to rejuvenate ourselves because or after the trauma, after the tragedy. I think these are, ways that we can pursue justice when we are denied justice in a legal sense.
Dr. Black, how do we begin that process of healing? There are a lot of things that have happened, a lot of atrocities. And honestly, I'll tell you, the majority of America, white America, would say, okay, that was a long time ago. It's time for you to get over it.
Yeah.
Insensitive as it may be.
It's hard to get over things that are not done. And when it's continuing to go on, it's hard to get over. But I want to go back for a moment, because you mentioned this idea of them getting paid for the story. And when I think about justice, in many ways, justice is this two-tiered system where people with money and wealth get a chance to pay their way out of a situation or bribe their way out of a situation. And when you talk about trauma that people have experienced, typically in other communities, people get paid and profit when they go through trauma. And African Americans get persecuted and penalized when they go through. The other communities, they write books and sing songs and start ministries and develop speaking platforms when something happened. For us, we have to start hiding in shame and praying for relief and ignoring that it happened and hoping that other people forget. And so we talk about this idea of where does the healing begin? The healing begins by acknowledgement. Somebody's got to say out loud, it happened and it was wrong. And I'll be the person to say it if nobody else will. What happened was an atrocity. It was horrific, and it should not have happened, and it should not continue to happen, not just with the two cases that we're discussing today, but with every case of every child that we read about in the news and their parents that we read about in the news or hear about on the news. It has to stop. And so when we talk about healing, we got to acknowledge it first. But then after we acknowledge it, we got to make resources available for people to get help, because typically African Americans don't have access to the types of services that are available. And so they still end up being marginalized, because even though services are available, counselors, psychologists, pastors and clergy, spiritual leaders are all available, they don't have access. They can't get there. They can't pay for it. And so monies need to be made available to be able to service the people who need the help. And so the trauma is there, but we can't begin the healing process with acknowledgement and making resources available.
Awesome. All right. My producer, John, you got a question?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I'd like to just voice my perspective on this real quick.
There you go. I was going to ask you to put yourself in the street. Right.
Just a few points that I come up with. You had mentioned you said something that has stuck in my mind, and I just need to address it. That white America won't be held accountable for these things, or isn't currently. Mm-hmm. I would agree that wasn't, and I looked it up, and there is no statute of limitations on accessory to murder. I think that this woman should be brought up on charges. There's no time limit on this.
I agree with you as well, but they just made the decision not to prosecute.
Oh yeah, no, that's terrible. But
so that means isn't, not wasn't.
Let's look at the Ahmaud Arbery case, though.
Yes.
They were just sentenced to, all three guys sentenced to life sentences for murder and hate crime. Was justice served there?
You know, I'll say this concerning that case, and I think, I'm interested in listening to what everyone has to say. Dr. Erby started off the conversation about the reason why there was even justice served for George Floyd. And that was because without a camera, without undeniable proof without having a closed caption audience and a pandemic, there never would have been justice to the degree that we saw it happen. And so I think that once again, Ahmaud Arbery, there was so much video, there was so much of this that was able to be seen that, you know, justice of any other color or kind would not have been able to stand, not in today's America.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that we also need to be comparing apples to apples. I think that I think Emmett Till and Ahmaud Arbery are a much better comparison because it was civilians killing civilians. Terrible things. I think that police killing civilians, black, white, whatever, there is a difference there. And I think that it has to do, it's a whole other conversation, and I'd love to get into it, but with qualified immunity and the rights that police have to avoid any responsibility for their actions. And I am all for that going away.
And I think that your point is well taken, but I think the similarity of both is that whether it's a white police officer or a white civilian, in many cases, white civilians are given the same authority as police officers depending on where you are. And when we look at the situation with Emmett Till, both of them are similar in the fact that they were both innocent, that they were both living and just doing, you know, and their lives were interrupted by white America, who thought that they have the ability to not only correct, but to take justice into their own hands. And so that would be the thing that I think was, but I think that your point is well taken. And it takes me to something that I was going to ask our two guests here. When we look at, you know, I was looking today, and there's all of these bills that are finally happening with the Democratic Senate and Congress. We'll just say Congress. One of the things that they were hoping, some of the moderate, and you know, Dr. King warned us about the moderate, the moderate Americans. But now there is this idea that we need to fight or push back on the defund the police rhetoric, and that we need to pass some legislation to support police officers and show the world that, I guess, the Democrats are not for, and I shouldn't say we, but they need to support Democrats by showing, or police officers by showing that Democrats are not defunders of the police. And progressives are saying, the progressive end are saying, no, I think that we need to look, why would we fund police officers? Other ways to combat crime. When you look at our historical relationship and even our current one with policing and police officers, how do you see that relationship? What are your thoughts in terms of how that relationship will move forward as we continue to evolve as a nation?
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in. I don't believe that we should actually defund the police.
Absolutely.
They need more funding because they need additional training and they need ongoing training and support. And so I think that it's like saying to defund them, it's like punishing them. And the goal is not to punish them, but to assist them to be more effective in doing their jobs and to be able to serve the communities that they say they come to serve. So if the people that they're serving are not afraid of them and welcome them when they see them and don't run from them. I mean, it's a shame to think we run from the police versus we run to them for help. And so defunding, I don't think is the answer, but I think providing additional resources. I mean, you got to consider, I think in some of the documents we were looking at earlier, we talked about how they just made lynching a federal hate crime in 2022.
Yeah.
I mean, it took that long to decide that's a hate crime. I mean, those are the kinds of things we need to be addressing. So we need to have better education, not only for the police, but also in the school system and with the legislation.
Follow-up question. So does training keep George Floyd alive?
Well, training doesn't keep him alive, but it may keep his cousin and his nephew alive.
Okay. All right. Dr. Erby, I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the defund the police slogan got misrepresented in many circles. I kind of think about it back in the 1960s when Black Power became a big slogan. And many people thought that it was the equivalent of white power, which it's not. Black Power is about, you know, economic empowerment, social empowerment, being firm in your identity. And I think defund the police is a similar type of thing. When we think about defunding the police budgets normally in every city takes over the city budget by a long shot. I mean, police budgets are more than education budgets. They're more than healthcare budgets. And so we have to really think about that. Why are we putting all of our resources, or the majority of our resources, in policing when we see the types of abuse and deaths that come out of that? What would happen if we took a chunk of that budget and put it toward education? Instead of closing down schools, we're actually rebuilding schools. That is what the defund the police movement should have been. But we think about it in terms of, we're just taking away money from police. And if we take away money from police, then crime will go up, all of those things. But it's really just a allocation of resources, and not necessarily completely taking away resources. And I think we have that conversation, then maybe more people will understand that we're not trying to completely remove police power in totality sense, but we're really trying to see what would change if, instead of closing down public schools, we actually created more public schools. What would change if, instead of making healthcare so expensive, we actually make it inexpensive so people can get the drugs and the things that they need, right? That's what that conversation should be about.
So definitely, yes, more funding for training, and definitely some of that funding being reallocated to mental health and services provided for people.
Right.
All right, Dr. Black, I know that you are off and you have something that you must take care of. I certainly thank you for your time and your attention. You will definitely be back here, and we will have more conversations, because I think you are so insightful with everything that you have to offer. So thank you for being.
Thank you so much for having me. It was good to be with you. And I'm really hoping that people are hearing the need, not only for change in our justice system, but change in our mental health system as well, because resources are needed and counsel is needed to help people deal with the trauma that we've experienced historically over time and continue to experience. So take care, and I'll see you next time.
Take care.
See you later. Thank you. All right, Dr. Erby, I want to spend a couple minutes here. You are doing, and I didn't know this when I reached out to you initially, but you're writing a book on Emmett Till's life. And could you share once again the reason why? I know that this was tied to your initial dissertation, I believe.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. Why did you initially give us some clarity on why did you initially decide to do this?
Yeah, so, like I said, when I was starting my graduate work, it was, 2014, 2015. And this was right at the beginning of Black Lives Matter through the Michael Brown case. And so we saw Ferguson on fire. We saw these massive protests and rebellions. And I'm over here, as a student, thinking about, how can I merge my educational interest to the actual current events that are happening. And so every time someone, a Black child is murdered by, vigilantes or the police or whatever, Emmett Till comes up. We see him as a symbol of injustice. We see him as a symbol of childhood innocence. And so his name always pops up. The story always pops up. And so when Michael Brown happened, again, Emmett Till comes up. And I'm thinking, this is interesting, because we always see Emmett Till's story through the lens of his open casket and his mother and her activism. But really, that's all we know. The majority of people who know Emmett Till's story know of his mother, know of the open casket, but they don't know anything else from his mother and what she was doing. And so I took that as an entry point to find out more. And so that's what my dissertation really wanted to do, is think about who she was as a mother, an activist, a teacher. But also, as I'm writing the book now, I am thinking of her as a hero, but what is her legacy now? In 2020, 2021, 2022, what can we learn from Mamie Till Mobley? And so that is what my book is going to be about, thinking about her as Emmett Till's mother, as an activist, but also as someone that we can look forward or look to as we go through our own activism in the years to come.
So you have been working with, and I don't want to let the cat out of the bag completely, but you have been working with survivors of his family, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you something. When we were having a conversation, and this was offline, you mentioned something and said something that I thought was really, really interesting in terms of how justice is being played out today. And you were talking about the things that have happened since 2020 with the cries for social justice and equity, and how equity, inclusion, and diversity are ways in which we are now finding justice play out in a way that it was very different than what we intended.
Yeah.
Could you expound upon that?
Yeah. So, when we're thinking about justice, we traditionally go to the legal system, the court system. Has someone been accused and tried in court, things of that nature, and if they're found guilty, we think of that as justice traditionally. But I think we should also think about the other forms of justice, other forms of fairness, other forms of accountability and equality, and that can happen in different ways outside of the legal system. And so when we think about post George Floyd, where you have corporations trying to hire more people of color, when we have more scholarships and opportunities being given to minority students, when we have people trying to create more representation on screen. So if we think about Women of the Movement, ABC's project on Mamie Till Mobley, and there's a new movie coming out in October about Emmett Till, right? These are forms of justice, of accountability, of truth telling, because what it says is these stories matter so much that even if there's no accountability in a legal sense, we can still try to create change through representation, through education, through other modes that will make a difference. And so that's the type of work that I think Emmett Till's family is also doing, right? Of course, they wanted someone to be held accountable for the death of their loved one. But when that has been denied, they have not stopped. I think another thing is, too, justice is also seen as a finite thing, that someone is found guilty, they're sentenced to a prison sentence, and that's it. But what we see with Emmett Till's family and other people is they're continually to do work. Right now, we see them trying to create federal monuments for Emmett Till. They're creating museums. They're creating educational, policies and curricula for students to learn about Emmett Till in schools. And so it's an ongoing fight. And so that's what I want us to think about, justice as an ongoing thing, instead of has someone been arrested, has someone been charged for a crime, and are they going to prison?
Really quickly, and I'm going to give you a minute to do this, okay, Brandon, because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Someone once said that no agenda, no Black American agenda or urban agenda is really an agenda if we don't address the issue of what's the term that I'm looking for? Restitution of our community. When we look at that, so what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to a degree that is true. But what I also think is there isn't just one way of doing that.
Okay.
I think there are several ways that we can make an impact, and there are several ways that we can, try to improve, the Black community, right? And it's really just this idea of what avenue do you want to take? Because whatever it is, there can be change and there's work to be done. For me, I'm very invested in education. I think that, telling the truth, learning, getting knowledge is a form of justice, is a form of restitution, as a form of self-transformation and community transformation. But for someone else, it can be, healthcare. It can be finance. It can be creating businesses. I think, everything that we think of in terms of what will make a fruitful life can be impacted, and the Black community can be improved by that. And so I think it's just, what is it that you want to make your case for, and then do that work.
All right, Brandon, I certainly want to thank you, Dr. Erby, for your time and attention. It's always good to see you. My mentee over here educating me on what's going on in the world. Such a great
full circle.
Full circle. We certainly thank you for your time and attention. You will certainly be back once again with one of our other panels. I want to thank you guys who have tuned in, both on our social media feed. Why don't you like, tag, and share this conversation? Go to our YouTube page, go to Facebook, join and follow us in this conversation. We thank you guys for tuning in with another conversation of race in America. To all of those who are out there, take care of yourselves and each other. God bless you. Grace and peace.
Thank you.